I work as a night security guard at a sprawling industrial park. It's a boring job, mostly consisting of sitting in the booth and occasionally walking around to make sure no one's trespassing. The warehouses are enormous and eerily quiet at night, with nothing but the hum of distant machinery to break the silence. One particular night, I was filling in for another guard at Warehouse 14, a building I'd never worked before. The place had a reputation among the other guards, stories about strange noises, tools disappearing, and motion detectors tripping without anyone in sight. I didn't believe any of it. It was just another big, empty building. The shift started normally enough. I did a walkthrough around 10 p.m., checking the loading docks and the storage areas. Everything was in place, and the cameras showed nothing unusual. Around midnight, I heard the first noise, a faint metallic clanging coming from somewhere deep inside the building. I told myself it was probably just a loose pipe or some machinery settling. Still, I decided to check it out, more out of boredom than anything else. I grabbed my flashlight and made my way toward the sound. The deeper I went into the warehouse, the colder and quieter it felt. The clanging stopped as I approached the general area it seemed to be coming from. I shone my flashlight around, but didn't see anything out of place. Just rows of pallets and stacks of boxes. On my way back to the booth, I thought I heard footsteps behind me. I stopped and turned, shining the light down the aisle I'd just come from. Nothing. By the time I got back to my desk, the cameras showed everything was still clear. I chalked the noise up to the building's old infrastructure. But about an hour later, the motion detector at Dock 3 went off. I switched to the corresponding camera feed, but didn't see anything moving. The loading bay was empty. Frustrated, I went to check it out in person. When I got there, the loading dock was just as empty as it had looked on the camera. But as I turned to leave, I noticed something. A faint, wet footprint on the floor, leading toward the back of the warehouse. I froze for a moment, staring at the footprint. It didn't make sense. There was no rain outside, and I hadn't seen anyone come in. Against my better judgment, I followed the prints, gripping my flashlight tightly. The trail led deeper into the warehouse, to a part of the building I hadn't explored earlier. At the end of the aisle was a metal door I hadn't noticed before. It was slightly ajar, with a faint light spilling out from inside. I hesitated. Something about the door felt wrong, like I wasn't supposed to go in. But my curiosity got the better of me. I pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was small, more like a storage closet, with a desk and a few old filing cabinets. On the desk was a notebook, its pages filled with handwritten notes and sketches. They were diagrams of the warehouse, but certain areas were circled or marked with symbols I didn't recognize. As I flipped through the pages, I heard the door creak behind me. I spun around, but no one was there. The door had closed on its own. I rushed to open it, but it wouldn't budge. A panic started to set in. I pounded on the door, shouting for help, even though I knew no one would hear me. That's when I heard the breathing. I was low and steady, coming from somewhere in the room. I turned, shining my flashlight around, but there was nothing. Then the light flickered and went out. In the pitch black, I felt something brush past me, cold and quick. My heart was racing as I fumbled for my phone to use its flashlight, but my hands were shaking so badly I could barely hold it. When I finally managed to turn it on, the room was empty again. The door suddenly creaked open, and I didn't hesitate. I bolted out of there, not stopping until I was back in the booth. The rest of the shift was a blur. I kept my eyes glued to the cameras, but nothing else happened. When my relief arrived in the morning, I didn't tell him what had happened. I just handed over the keys and left. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about the notebook. Something about those diagrams felt important, like they were a warning or a map of something hidden in the warehouse. The next day, I went back during daylight hours to check the room again, but when I got there, the door was gone. Not locked, not boarded up, just gone, like it had never been there. The section of the wall where it had been was solid concrete. I don't know what I experienced that night, and I don't plan on going back to find out. All I know is that Warehouse 14 isn't just a building. Something is in there, something that doesn't want to be found. A few years ago, I took a temporary job as a night shift worker at an industrial storage facility on the edge of town. It was one of those jobs no one wanted, boring, low pay, and downright creepy at night. My main task was simple: monitor the cameras, do a walkthrough of the warehouse every couple of hours, and log any issues. The facility was huge, with rows of identical storage units and endless aisles of machinery and stacked pallets. During the day, it was alive with forklifts and workers. At night, though, it felt abandoned, like the building itself was holding its breath. One particular night, everything seemed normal until around 2 a.m. I was reviewing the camera feeds when I noticed movement near one of the farthest storage units, Unit 27C. The motion detectors hadn't gone off, and no one was supposed to be there. I stared at the screen, trying to figure out what I was seeing. It looked like a person, tall, thin, and moving strangely, almost gliding between the shadows. I radioed the main office to report it, but there was no response. Frustrated, I grabbed my flashlight and headed toward 27C to check it out myself. The walk to the unit felt longer than usual, the silence around me amplifying every sound. When I reached 27C, the door was slightly open. That wasn't right. Every unit was supposed to be locked. I hesitated, debating whether to go in or just report it and let someone else handle it in the morning. But before I could decide, I heard something. It was faint at first, like a low hum, but it grew louder the closer I got to the unit. It sounded almost like whispering, though I couldn't make out any words. Against my better judgment, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The unit was mostly empty, except for a few crates in the corner. But the whispering didn't stop. It felt like it was coming from all around me, echoing off the metal walls. I shone my flashlight around, but there was no one there. Suddenly, the doors slammed shut behind me. I ran to pull it open, but it wouldn't budge. The whispers grew louder, overlapping and chaotic, filling my head. Panicking, I banged on the door, shouting for help. And then, just as quickly as it started, the sound stopped. The door creaked open on its own. I stumbled out, heart racing, and sprinted back to the office. The rest of the shift passed in tense silence. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something had been in that unit with me. The next night, I almost called in sick, but curiosity got the better of me. I wanted answers. This time I decided to check the facility records for Unit 27C. The logbook was old, with handwritten entries detailing which units were occupied and by whom. When I found the entry for 27C, my stomach sank. The unit had been marked as closed for years. According to the records, it wasn't supposed to be rented out or even accessible. I decided to dig deeper. In the back of the office, there was an older ledger listing details about past tenants. When I found 27C's last occupant, I froze. It belonged to a man named Carl Dempsey, a former maintenance worker who had gone missing nearly a decade ago. The story came flooding back. Carl had been working late one night and never clocked out. A search was conducted, but no one ever found him. The rumors were that he'd been involved in something shady, maybe smuggling or theft, and had run off. Others believed he'd gotten trapped somewhere in the vast building and never made it out. Feeling a mix of fear and determination, I decided to go back to the unit one last time. When I got there, the door was locked again, but this time I had a key. I hesitated before unlocking it, my hands shaking. The moment the door swung open, the whispers started again, louder and more urgent than the night before. In the center of the unit was a small box I hadn't noticed the previous night. It looked old and weathered, and my gut told me not to touch it, but I couldn't stop myself. Inside was a collection of items, a rusted flashlight, a torn maintenance log, and a keycard with Carl's name on it. That's when the whispers turned into something else. A low growl that sent chills down my spine. I backed away, slamming the box shut, and ran. As I reached the office, I noticed the cameras flickering. On the screen, every feed showed the same thing. The interior of Unit 27C, the camera seemingly staring at the closed box. I quit that night. A week later, I heard the facility had been shut down. Apparently, several workers had reported strange occurrences, and management decided it wasn't worth the hassle. I still wonder what I stumbled into that night. Whether it was Carl Dempsey's spirit trapped in that unit, or something far darker, I'll never know. All I know is that some doors are better left unopened.